So despite your love for film, going back to Close Encounters, seeing it as being this magical experience, at one point you really thought you would never be a filmmaker or director, not even short films for fun?
Yeah, I mean, it's in my case, and probably the case of every filmmaker out there, you see that spark and you love it and you fight and you sacrifice everything to get there and you do it and you do it and you do it. And then it doesn't quite happen the way you think. You're not plucked out of obscurity like some of these guys are. You're still working in the trenches for years, and it can get frustrating. And then in my case, I did a film that had a lot of controversy around it and was never ultimately released. And it was so utterly devastating because after so many years of just working and working and working and sacrifice, this film looked like it was going to really be something. And then instead, it's not released, and there's a lot of controversy and bad press and all these ugly things. And it devastated me so much that I didn't know if it was worth it. And I circled the drain, because it's hard to go from something like that, from a film that was so artistically satisfying, with such a great script and all these things, to go from that to going back to trying to find work as doing more corporate stuff. How do you even, what am I gonna do? I circled the drain for a long time. Because my life was not turning out the way I thought it would. And this is everyone's story, right? Everyone, we all think we know how it's going to turn out, and life does this to you and goes back this way, and So for a few years, I didn't know. My wife suggested to me, maybe we should just sell everything and go teach English in Korea. And I seriously thought about it. It got to a point with me where I had to just, it stripped everything away from me and got me back to the basics of what do I really love? It forced me to take another look at what do I love about the film industry and filmmaking and storytelling. And I found that spark again. I love moving people and crafting stories, and I love to see people laugh when they're supposed to or jump when they're supposed to. I have worked my whole life for that. There's no feeling and I don't know anything else. I couldn't do anything else. And I also had to, and take that experience and try to see all the good that came out of it, because a lot of good did, and move forward, which was not easy, but that's the other thing they don't tell you in film school is what happens when discouragement hits, because it does. It can, especially when the success doesn't come when you think it will,
Or it builds up to it and it feels like you're being blamed or something.
Yeah, I mean, there is and I started this by saying this, we are sold on this idea that filmmaking will happen in a certain way. Like the Duplass brothers were speaking at a film festival years ago, or whatever. I read this article somewhere, and they said, here's what you do. You make your film for $500, and then you get distribution on it. You'll make some money on it. Then you make your second film, and you put a big star in it, and that'll do well on the festival circuit. Yeah, well, it might happen that way, but it might not. For most people, that's not how it happens. You'll make your film, and you'll mortgage your house, and then nothing happens. That's so common. That happens all the time. The film disappeared on Netflix, and that's the end. And now what? And you're not discovered, and you're not picked from obscurity. And so then what do you do from there? Do you keep going? How much do you really love this? How hard are you willing to write that next script, get the next one going, fight for that next client with everything you've got, and fight that cynicism that wants to just rear its ugly little head. That's where the love of it will really, you better discover it. You better know why you love it. And I do think it's worth fighting for. All the negativity, all the challenges, all the frustrations is worth fighting through to get there, because it really is great. When you're on set and it's working and you're telling that story and the actors are there and the cinematography, it's so all of that disappears and just fades away. and you're just like, wow, I'm creating this amazing moment and it's working. Yeah, it's worth fighting for. No question.
Do you think that was the main good that came out, is knowing how bad you wanted to fight
Yeah.
for it? Knowing that you could have packed up and nothing wrong with teaching, but
There's nothing wrong with teaching.
it just wouldn't have been, you would have been thinking about the films you wanted to make.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
No.
guys, let's take out our notebooks and then.
I had to be stripped back to the basics and go back to rediscovering what I loved. And yeah, I think that's healthy sometimes. I think it's good to do, you know? Struggle is good. Hard work is good. It can be a real positive thing. It doesn't feel good when you're in it, but afterwards, anyone who's ever struggled usually looks back and says it was a good thing. I mean, you look at like David Sanborn, famous saxophone player, had polio as a kid, you know? And he started playing, the doctor told him as a kid he either needed to start some sort of exercise like swimming or a wind instrument. So he picks up saxophone. James Earl Jones had a stutter. And now he's the voice of Darth Vader with one of the most memorable voices, all because he had to work his voice and work through that struggle to get there. Most people who do great things, Nelson Mandela, I'm reading his book right now, like the struggles he went through, and he became one of the most inspiring leaders in the world because of the struggles he went through and how great that made him as a leader. Like, struggle's good. It's a positive thing.
I just watched the Miles Davis documentary. It was great, and just Dad didn't want him to be a jazz musician. He came from sort of a wealthy family, and just all the things that he went through. He didn't want to come back to the States. He really wanted to be in Paris where all the artists were. And just, I mean, his whole journey, he had to reinvent himself several times within sort of that genre. And there were a few years where he just put down his instruments and wouldn't do anything, and he fell prey to drugs, and just they thought he was done, and then turned out he wasn't, you know, and he reinvented himself each time. And he just kind of talked about how a great artist always has to keep reinventing. They can't stay stagnant.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you've talked about filmmakers being in a rut. Have you ever felt being in a rut? What do you do to shake things up?
You know what's funny about the rut? So like everyone looks at the film, well, any success of life, but filmmaking in specific, we all look at it like this mountain that we're climbing, and we're looking at the peak, you know, oh, if I could direct the next Marvel movie or whatever, that's the peak. Well, I don't see it that way. I think we're all ants crawling across a plowed field. It's flat, and it goes like this. And it's an ant climbing over that first little rise might be landing your first gig. Maybe it's landing any gig, right? You crest that hill and I'm working in film. And then then immediately as soon as you get there, you look at the next gig. Maybe the next mountain is directing for the first time, right? God, you climb and you finally, you get it. You cross over and you get into it. So, that's normal. That's what we're all ants crawling across this field with our own little goals and things that we're trying to do. Well, what can happen is let's say your first gig, you land your first gig, and it's working for reality television as an editor. Perfectly respectable job, Well, you get over that rise and you end up in that little pocket and you're safe from the wind and you're not struggling to make the rent. But if you're not careful, you'll stay there. Because what can happen is you'll end up 5 years later and, oh man, there's that next rise right in front of me. That rise was to write that feature screenplay I've always meant to write, and I never have done it because I'm too busy editing for reality television or whatever. That's your rut. Every time you crest one of those things and you end up in the safeness of the trough, it can become a rut if you're not careful. Now, I'm not saying that editing for reality television is a bad thing. It's purely on your own perception on where you want to be. And also because the playing field is level, because maybe you want to go several humps over and get to, say, directing for television, doing all the, whatever the latest TV show is, CSI or what, that's not even on anymore, I don't think. But you're over here. Well, maybe you get there, you don't like it. And you want to go back and teach. You go back across the field. You're not going down. You're making a lateral move over here to go something that you enjoy. Maybe you just loved making documentaries more than you ever loved doing television, and that's totally fine. And but that's how it is. Like every success can become a rut. And you just need to, this is why I made the commitment years ago to absolutely make sure I'm making a forward step every single day. Some sort of either writing that screenplay, reading an article in American Cinematographer, watching a Film Courage video, or whatever it is, like doing something to continually hone and improve your craft every single day. I don't care how tired you are, keep improving, keep growing, keep pushing and striving. And all of a sudden, one day, you're going to realize you've mastered it.
Do you know when you're in a rut? When you've been?
Oh, I think you do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. Sometimes it might take someone to wake you up. I think people somewhere deep inside know. I think a lot of us feel that we're already in a rut. I think if you're not being challenged, that's a big sign. If you're going to work and it's just kind of, and it's no longer hard, that's a bad sign. Probably means that you're there, yeah. And or if you've done, this is hard to say. I would say if you've done the same thing for a long time and never changed. I don't mean that having a job for a long time is a negative thing. I mean, like, if you're just doing the same thing over and over and never trying something new even with, let's say you're a teacher and you just teach out of the same book for 20 years without ever researching something else or trying new teaching methods or experimenting with different ways, looking at what worked and what didn't work and changing it up sometimes. I think that's important because you can stagnate. Yeah.